Hey everybody, welcome into the Alabama Recruiting Show. I'm Hannah Chalker alongside our Crimson Tide recruiting expert, Chris Kirchner. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope your Iron Bowl loss hangover has finally passed, but I know it's only Monday, Chris, so maybe some of you guys are still reeling. I know that we're still upset here on SEC Country, the Alabama page. And Chris, I want to get your thoughts on the game because not only were you at Jordan-Hare Stadium, but you have a battle wound. He's got like this nice cut underneath his eye. What happened?
Yeah, as you can see, I do have a cut under my eye. It was a little swollen after on Saturday, but
give him a little better look at it.
Yeah, I'll take the glasses off, but it's not that bad. But a crazy Auburn fan pumped up after the game, decided that he wanted to shake around a caution sign, the ones you place if the floor is wet, shaking it around and just whacked me in the face. Little blood from the eye. All good. Didn't stop me from recording the chaotic scene on the field. It was definitely a fun experience for sure, and I have a story to tell for the rest of my life.
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell the grandkids. Now that was down on the field, so were you a part of everyone storming the field then?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like rushing the field and celebrating, but I was definitely down there. A lot of video of the scene at Jordan-Hare Stadium. It was definitely a cool experience. Obviously not for Alabama fans, but it was my first time ever seeing a fan base rush the field. I had never been a part of that before, so it was definitely a cool experience to see.
Yeah. Thoughts on the game itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alabama got outcoached, outplayed in pretty much every facet of the game. I was definitely surprised with the lack of rushing attempts from Alabama's running backs throughout the game. Alabama's running backs only had 18 rushing attempts, and I know Auburn's defense is definitely elite. But, heading into this game against Auburn, Alabama's running backs have been very, very successful. Damian Harris, Bo Scarborough, Josh Jacobs, they've all had really good seasons so far. So to see Alabama kind of abandon the running game, I know Jalen Hurts had, I think over 15 carries himself, but to see Alabama not utilize its running backs was definitely a surprise. The defense, very poor tackling on multiple plays. Auburn loves to have that fastball offense, get the ball out of Jarrett Stidham's hands quickly. And the defensive backs, the linebackers, they definitely seem a step slow in that game. I know Alabama, saw Christian Miller, Mack Wilson get back on the field, but I think those guys definitely were a step slow. And who knows, maybe if Alabama gets back, in the hunt for the playoffs, we'll have to see how it goes this weekend with the conference championship games. But maybe this off time and not playing in an SEC championship game will help Alabama, again, if Alabama makes the playoffs, because Alabama for a whole is definitely beat up. So we'll see what happens moving forward.
Well, with the 26-14 loss, Auburn breaks Alabama's 25-game win streak over SEC opponents. That's all we're going to say about it. We're going to move on. Of course, it's going to affect recruiting, though, so we're going to talk about that today. We've got a great show coming up for you. We're also going to talk about some of Alabama's top targets that were on the sidelines of Auburn, and were they impressed by the Tigers, or are they still with the Tide? So we're going to give you some updates there. We also want you to join in on the conversation on Facebook, so keep the comments coming, keep them rolling in, and we'll get to those later in the show. We want your questions too, and Chris can answer those for you as well. But let's start the show with talking about just that. So with the loss and with such a big win for Auburn, everything was on the line in this game. A West implication, SEC championship berth, possible national championship berth. With that environment, how does that affect Alabama recruiting with, like I said, those big time targets on the field for the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely affects Alabama. For one, Alabama is not preparing for an SEC championship game this weekend, so the coaching staff will now use that time that they were likely going to focus on practice and turn that attention toward recruiting. So now we are in the contact period of the NCAA football recruiting calendar. That means that you'll likely see kids post on Twitter about how such and such coach from this school is in their homes. I know from last year's class, we saw Nick Saban wobble in Jared Maiden's house, so you get to see some cool stuff there. So Alabama will now use this week that it was going to, unfortunately now, prepare for an SEC championship game, but that's not going to happen. So Alabama will now start recruiting sooner, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Alabama still only has 11 commitments. The early signing day period is approaching soon, so for Alabama to have a full week now to recruit and get in these kids' homes when there's so many coaching changes going on, and who knows who's going to go where. I think this time on the recruiting trail this week is definitely going to be important for Alabama as the team looks to seal another top 5, another, who knows, maybe a top class once again. I still don't think Alabama's going to land the top class, but I definitely think a top 5 class is definitely within reach.
Well, if the rivalry wasn't already heated enough, now they're battling for recruits. And if you joined us last week, Chris went over all of the different players that were going to be there. So, Chris, give us a refresher on who was there and what did you observe since you were right there on the sidelines with them?
Yeah, at Auburn, it's definitely an interesting experience. At Alabama, the recruits actually sit in the stands. At Auburn, a lot of its main targets were actually sitting on the field. Emory Jones was had a front seat view. Asa Martin, 4-star running back who's committed to Auburn, but Alabama would love to flip him. 2019 linebacker King Makuta, who's arguably one of Alabama's top 5 overall targets in this class. Savion Smith, 4-star cornerback. Luke Ford, 4-star tight end. 3-star defensive end Andreas Fox was there. So all of those guys were there. And, a big-time win like that for Auburn definitely can influence some of these guys' decisions, especially if they're deciding between the two schools. So, in a win like that, in that environment where the fans rush the field, recruits absolutely love that. It's definitely not a negative for the Tigers, especially getting a win like that over a hated rival in Alabama. It can only help Auburn on the recruiting trail. But when we look at the big picture of things, I don't think it's going to matter too much for Alabama. Yes, a loss definitely, stifles some of the momentum Alabama may have had with some of these kids, but I definitely don't think it's that big of a deal at the end of the day.
Chris, you mentioned Emory Jones, 4-star QB from Franklin, Georgia, and Alabama's top target at QB. He was on the sidelines, and you actually said he stuck around for quite a while and talked to Gus Malzahn after the game. Tell me about, I know fans are going to want to know about Emory Jones and what his status is now.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that Alabama has a really good chance at flipping Emory Jones from Ohio State. Yes, Emory Jones was the last recruit to leave the stadium on Saturday. He left shortly before Gus Malzahn did, and I know Emory had a pretty lengthy conversation with Gus Malzahn. But from talking to people close to the Auburn side of things, Auburn still feels like they don't really have that much of a chance with Emory Jones. They still feel like it's an Alabama-Ohio State race for him. It's the second time that Emory Jones visited Auburn in this past month. So you definitely have to consider Auburn to be somewhat of a factor here, but I still think that Alabama has a really good chance at flipping him. He actually led his high school team to another playoff win this past Friday. So Heard County will play once again this upcoming Friday against Hateville Charter. So again, I've said it pretty much every show now, but don't expect Emory Jones to make any decision regarding his recruitment until his season is over. So with another game this upcoming Friday, I don't expect any sort of decision by the end of the week. So we'll see what happens as far as Heard County's game goes against Hateville Charter this upcoming Friday. But once again, I still don't think Auburn is that much of a factor. Yes, he has visited there twice, but I still think Alabama has a really good chance at flipping him from Ohio State.
All right, from one top target to another, 4-star tight end Luke Ford from Illinois. He was actually taking an official visit to Auburn this weekend for the Iron Bowl, and this is Alabama's top tight end target. What's his status?
Yeah, I mean, I think Auburn definitely had a very impressive visit for Luke Ford and his family. Yes, Luke Ford is one of Alabama's top tight end targets. Top 3 of Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia now. Auburn actually inserted itself into the conversation after this past weekend. And again, a game like this in that environment can only help Auburn with their top recruits. And Luke Ford is one of Auburn's top recruiting targets. So he definitely loved his experience there. The one thing I can say about Luke Ford and Alabama's pursuit of him, his brother is actually looking to transfer to his school. He played a season at Southern Illinois. He's a fullback. He has preferred walk-on offers from both Auburn and Georgia at this time. His brother does not have an offer from Alabama. Nick Saban was actually pretty straightforward with the Ford family, and Saban told him, like, look, we don't use fullbacks at Alabama, so it's likely that Noah, Luke's brother, will never get an offer from Alabama, and that definitely will hurt Alabama's chances because both Luke and Noah want to play at the same school together. So if Alabama is not going to offer Noah a preferred walk-on spot, I don't see Luke Ford actually choosing Alabama when he makes his decision, which right now he's expected to do on the early signing period, which starts on December 20th. So I don't think Alabama is going to land Luke Ford at this time, but I do think Alabama will land the nation's #1 junior college tight end, Dominic Wood-Anderson. He is the team's top choice at tight end at this time. He was once committed to Texas, decommitted from Texas after Alabama really got in his ear about possibly joining the Crimson Tide. So I do think Dominic Wood-Anderson is going to be the team's tight end in this class.
Well, we know what else happened this week. Not only an Iron Bowl loss, but a complete shakeup. Shakeup's not the right word. Meltdown, absolute meltdown of SEC coaches, and it's affecting recruiting for sure across the board. Let's start with the guy, Jacob Copeland, 4-star wide receiver out of Pensacola, Florida, and now one of Alabama's top wide receiver targets. So he was committed to Florida, decommitted from the Gators after the Iron Bowl game, and then of course Dan Mullen now to Florida. So what's the deal with Jacob Copeland? Some of these recruits bounce all over the place, and you've kind of ironed it out for us.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really that big of a surprise to see Jacob Copeland reopen things. I've been saying since early October that Copeland would likely reopen his recruitment. It was just a matter of when. But the only thing about Copeland here is that he just didn't flip from Florida to Alabama. He reopened his recruitment. He's uncommitted. He's going to plan on taking all 5 of his official visits. He will not make a decision until National Signing Day in February. So Alabama will definitely have some work to do here. He grew up a Gators fan. But, with Jim McElwain getting fired from Florida, that definitely hurt Florida's chances of retaining Jacob Copeland's commitment. And he went ahead and decommitted from the Gators Saturday night. But the interesting thing about Jacob Copeland is that he's a pretty big fan of Dan Mullen. I know it doesn't really make sense if you've followed Copeland's recruitment, just because he hasn't really expressed any interest at all in Mississippi State. But he actually visited Starkville last year, shortly after picking up an offer from the Bulldogs. He loves Dan Mullen. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how Mullen being at Florida affects Copeland, and whether or not he actually decides to give his commitment back to Florida. But as of now, I still think Alabama is the favorite to land Copeland when he makes his decision on National Signing Day. He's visited Tuscaloosa several times this fall. He was actually planning on returning to Tuscaloosa for the Mercer game, but that Friday before the Mercer game, he actually hurt his leg, and that was the reason why he ended up not making that trip. So it's going to be interesting to see what Dan Mullen's pitch is to Copeland. From what I was told, Mullen has actually already been in contact with Copeland since taking the job on Sunday. That just goes to show you how important Copeland is to Florida. So as of now, I still think Alabama is in a really good spot at landing Jacob Copeland's commitment, a top 50 overall recruit and Under Armour All-American.
All right, another storyline in the SEC this week, of course, Kevin Sumlin out at Texas A&M. How does that affect Alabama, and are there any Aggie recruits or commits that are flipping?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens at Texas A&M. There are three names to know as far as how Texas A&M firing Sumlin affects Alabama's recruiting efforts. 4-star defensive tackle Bobby Brown is probably the biggest most important name. Over the summer, Bobby Brown was Alabama's top defensive tackle target in this 2018 class. He ultimately decided to commit to Texas A&M over Alabama, which was his number 2 school when he committed, mainly because he wanted to remain close to home. He is from the state of Texas in Arlington. He's actually former teammates with current Alabama offensive lineman Chris Owens. Those two are actually pretty good friends, but Bobby Brown hasn't commented just yet on how someone being out at Texas A&M affects his recruitment. I know a lot of the times when there is a coaching change, a lot of recruits decide to decommit and reopen things. Right now, Bobby Brown hasn't done that just yet, and I know Alabama has already turned up the heat on Bobby Brown once again. I'm sure the coaching staff is going to drill it into his head like, we have stability here. Nick Saban is going nowhere. And that's something that a lot of recruits respect with Alabama. It's the stability. They know Alabama is never going to get rid of Nick Saban. Nick Saban will go on his own terms. So it's something that recruits definitely respect with Alabama. 2 other names to know as far as Texas A&M firing someone affecting Alabama recruiting. Current commitment, Vernon Jackson, linebacker recruit. He is from the state of Texas, committed to Alabama over Texas A&M and TCU. He's actually visited College Station this fall. But with Vernon Jackson, Alabama has a lot of linebacker targets in this class. I don't know if Vernon Jackson is actually going to have his spot when signing day rolls around. It's definitely the unfortunate side of recruiting because it's a business. College football is a business. Alabama wants to get the best players for its class. And if they feel like another linebacker target is better than Vernon Jackson, then Alabama will just go ahead and replace Vernon. For the main reason of him not shutting down his recruitment entirely. He's taken multiple visits elsewhere. He's visited Baylor. He's visited TCU. He's visited Texas A&M. So it's possible that Vernon Jackson sees his spot get taken in this class. So out of all the current 11 commitments in this class, I would definitely say Vernon Jackson's commitment to Alabama is the shakiest. And then finally, 4-star wide receiver Jalen Waddle, also from the state of Texas. Major Alabama target, one of its top overall targets in this class. Alabama's top slot wide receiver target, actually. He is down to Alabama. Texas A&M is also still in the race. Oregon, Florida State. With Kevin Sumlin now out at Texas A&M, I would almost guarantee that Waddle is no longer considering Texas A&M. He already wasn't strongly considering the Aggies in the first place. It's really an Alabama-Oregon race. And as I've said on previous shows, I'd be pretty surprised if Jalen Waddle was not in Crimson in 2018.
All right, we mentioned Texas A&M, we mentioned Mississippi State and Dan Mullen going to Florida. That's just the tip of the iceberg in this SEC craziness. So look for a lot of recruits to make new decisions coming up, and we're right here every Monday to talk about what's going on at Alabama. Before we get to your comments, that's Chris Kirchner. I'm Hannah Chalker. Go ahead and send in your question and comments on our Facebook Live so we can answer those in just a minute. But Chris, I want to get your final thoughts, your recap on Alabama recruiting during the Iron Bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a loss hurts Alabama, especially with so many major targets on the sidelines for Auburn. You can guarantee that the Auburn coaching staff just drilled it into these recruits' heads like, this could be you next year. You could help lead Auburn over Alabama in the future. I know I've talked to some recruits in the past who have said, that they want to go to a team that could beat Alabama and overtake them and create something special. So you can definitely guarantee that Auburn drilled that message into these recruits' heads this past weekend. So it's going to be interesting to see if that Iron Bowl loss actually affects Alabama and if we actually see tangible results. Because right now, all we can see is that, yes, Auburn won, and yes, it was an electric atmosphere, and the recruits loved their trip. So we'll see how it plays out over these next few weeks. And like I said, the early signing period is coming on December 20th. It's going to be interesting to see which recruits utilize the early signing period and which recruits ultimately decide to wait until the previous National Signing Day in February.
Chris, unlike other shows where we're getting a bunch of names and our viewers want to ask about a bunch of different recruits. Everyone's basically wanting to ask, including Rudy Wise, your thoughts on if Alabama can still make the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alabama definitely needs some help here. You know, it depends if TCU beats Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, if Ohio State beats Wisconsin. I think if one of those two happen, I think Alabama definitely has a case to make it. Because right now, the SEC championship game is a de facto playoff game. The ACC championship, same thing. Those two conferences are guaranteed a spot. If Oklahoma wins, I think Oklahoma is definitely going to make it. And if Wisconsin beats Ohio State, I think there's absolutely no way the committee is going to leave out an undefeated Big Ten champion in Wisconsin. So Alabama definitely needs some help. If you're a Crimson Tide fan, root for TCU, root for Ohio State. If they win, Alabama, in my opinion, is definitely going to get a spot.
Carl McCuller says we need a QB that's not a ball-hogging showboat. We also have some people on here calling for Tua to come in instead of Jalen Hurts. What was your thought on Hurts leading all Alabama rushers?
Yeah, I mean, for those people who want a quarterback change, I think it's absolutely ridiculous and foolish. You know, Jalen Hurts, I believe, is 24-2 as a starting quarterback at Alabama. If that's not good enough for you, I don't have anything to say. I just think it's ridiculous that fans want a freshman quarterback who has not started a game yet to take over for Jalen Hurts, who was, if we remember, you know, about 2 minutes away from being a legend last season and leading Alabama to a national championship over Clemson in his first year. So I think the talk of Tua, you know, taking over for Jalen just should stop. Jalen Hurts has done a good job. Yes, I think he's still limited as a passer, but again, he's led Alabama to double-digit wins in his first 2 seasons. So I think Jalen Hurts is fine at the end of the day.
C-Beans Nunez wants to ask, does Alabama have any top offensive linemen we can be excited about?
Yeah, Alabama has 2 offensive linemen currently committed right now in this class. 4-star center Emil Ekiyor, who could possibly be Bradley Bozeman's replacement this upcoming season. Very talented center from the state of Indiana. He's going to sign during the early signing period, but he will not enroll at Alabama until the summer, just because his school doesn't allow early graduates. And then Alabama also has a commitment from Tommy Brown, a 4-star offensive tackle from the state of California. Alabama is also still recruiting 4-star offensive tackles, Nicholas Petit-Friere from the state of Florida, and Penei Sewell from Utah. Those are the 2 uncommitted guys that Alabama fans should know. I expect Alabama to land one of them at this time. If I were to guess on which 2 of Sewell and Petit-Friere, I would say Sewell is going to choose Alabama. He's expected to make his decision in these upcoming weeks as well.
All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, even though we are about to be done live here, where can fans leave our video and head and find all of your recruiting information?
Yep, SECcountry.com. Make sure you guys choose Alabama as your team, then click recruiting, and then all of our articles on Alabama recruiting will be right there for you guys.
All right, and we're here every Monday at 5 right here on SEC Country to give you the latest in Alabama recruiting. That's Chris Kirschner. You can follow him on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I'm Hannah Chalker. Thanks so much for joining us on the Alabama Recruiting Show, and we'll see you right back here next week. Roll Tide, everybody.